stimulation. What are the red and black? Is that like...
Anodes and cathodes.
Okay. So, and I think you mentioned something about frequency before. Is this like pulsed or what kind of?
It's the frequency, so for the voluntary, they usually range about 25 hertz to sometimes 45. Standing, we have a little bit more variability, but it's constant stimulation.
Right. Okay. So what's the difference as far as the stimulation between the anodes and cathodes? It's like one. What is that doing different?
Well, so kind of we know that the cathodes are pretty much driving the stimulation. So if we kind of where you see the cathodes, that's the direction of the stimulation. So we're able to manipulate with how many cathodes and anodes, especially using the anodes to block the stimulation. It's like, okay, we want the stimulation to go higher on the muscles, higher on the leg, to allow that connection on those muscles. Yeah. Yes.
So when you stimulate the electrode array, is it so that the brain can send a signal to the leg, or what is?
Well, for the voluntary activity, there has to be some component there of the brain sending a signal. Now, what we are figuring out is that the brain doesn't have to organize the activity in the muscles. The brain has to send the command, I want to move, and then the spinal cord kind of organizes, okay, which motor units do I need to fire at what time and so forth. For like standing, it's more the sensory information. So the plantar surface of like your foot feels the pressure from the ground. Oh, I need extension. So it's not, for standing, it's not so, oh, I'm standing, I'm standing, I'm standing, I'm standing. It's more, allows the spinal cord to process that information coming from the periphery. Now stepping, it turns out that they actually have to say, I'm moving my left leg and extending my left leg. So it's different components, but the information from the periphery, the sensory information is all, it's a key component as well. It doesn't just come, it's not just as simple as allowing the brain to communicate with the spinal cord. Yeah.
Why do we implant all subjects at the same?
Because that's where all the previous research, training research has shown that those are the locomotor networks. So that's where all the networks for locomotion and standing are located in the spinal cord. So one of the requirements is that your injury has to be higher than L1, because if your injury is lower than L1, then your injury impacts those networks. So from our perspective, all the networks that we need are intact, right? So the injury is higher, there might be disruption at the injury site, but nothing where the networks that control locomotion and everything else are. So that's what we're tapping into an intact network. Yes?
Just have a question. How does the weight of the individuals affect the whole training process? I mean,
The weight?
Yeah, the weight of the individuals.
So we, like for standing, we load over ground, so maximally right away. So weight is not, it's not so much for stepping, we try to control it because there's a lot more movement. You're moving the hips, so you have to control the trunk, and sometimes they don't have full trunk control. So for stepping, we do body weight support to kind of reduce the weight on the legs a little bit, but that's part of the progression of let's try to bring that body weight down. From standing, like a thin individual versus a heavier individual, it doesn't really matter. It's what they're like prior to injury. It's just load. Load will activate the networks that we need, even if it's a little load. More load is better, we know that, but overall load will activate the networks.
Yeah. One more question.
Mm-hmm.
At the very beginning slide, you mentioned that like the training procedure like 80 sessions.
Mm-hmm.
Is this like a standard 8 sessions?
It's every day, like 5 days a week. 5 days a week for an hour, and that's kind of one of our requirements. You have to be loading for an hour. So it might take you an hour and a half if you need to sit down 5 times. So the 80 sessions, again, this is from previous research. We used to do 60. We found that we were just sometimes hitting a little bit of, we're seeing more improvements. So, and then also you have to think about funding, right? Can we go 100? Well, 100 is probably going to be better than 80, but then who's going to give us the money to continue forever? So 80 is kind of the happy medium. It's not a magical number, but it's long enough to allow the progression and kind of it takes, everybody ramps up a little bit differently. So usually you start slow and then you start seeing more improvements. And, you know, could we go longer? Yes, but I think it's more of a funding, and we have to show results at some point. So.
I have a question.
Mm-hmm.
Like, do you see the response of male and female patients the same, or?
Well, so we haven't done any females yet. We have our next person to be implanted. It's going to be a female, so that's kind of our next. Now, if you look at the statistics, 80% of injuries are males, so that's why we have an easier time recruiting males. But that is one of the things that our funding sources and our advisors have said. You know, what about the females? So we're making an effort right now to at least recruit at 20%, whatever that number is, of females within all of our projects. So in this case, will be 1 female out of 4.
One more question.
Mm-hmm.
I know that you tried low frequency, but if you go to the high frequency, how does this affect the? Do you think this can improve the response of the patient, or still the same, or become worse?
So again,
I know maybe the answer is not, but just
everybody's different,
yes.
but usually higher frequencies will shut down the system.
Shut down.
And if you look at the pain, remember this is a pain stimulator. Pain stimulation is usually done at very high frequencies. So for us, the higher frequencies, and by higher I mean anything above 50, 45, 50, it's you start seeing a decline.
Any more questions?
Yeah, just one more question. Yeah, like if the individual has another injury other than the spinal cord injury, like if he has like the ACL or some kind like the lateral meniscus, so if these conditions are existing, does this affect the final response on the muscles?
We haven't, so right now everybody that we have recruited has only had a spinal cord injury. Now, when you talk about spinal cord injuries and you talk about traumatic injuries, there might be a musculoskeletal injury associated with spinal cord, but that has to be resolved. So we haven't, if it's musculoskeletal ACL, I don't anticipate much of a difference. Now, if you're talking about a neurological injury, so a nerve injury, now you might still start kind of muddying the waters a little bit. So we haven't really tested that because we want to remain as clean as possible for
Just normal.
yes, yeah.
Any more questions? So at the end, we'll have to thank the doctor.